Mashiach from the Hasidic perspective and from the Lubavitcher perspective. So I want to talk about Mashiach from the Misnagdim perspective, meaning the non-Hasidic perspective. And here it's very important for us to understand the Rambam. And the Chabad also derives their Shita from the Rambam, but it's very difficult to sustain their approach on the Rambam. As the Rambam says, that basically anybody can be Mashiach as long as from the house of David. The house of David does not necessarily mean, there's a common misconception, that he has to be a male descendant of the house of David, but rather because the Yaakov Avinu was under the impression that, I missed you last night.
I wasn't in class.
Yaakov Avinu was under the impression that Shimshon was going to be Mashiach. And Shimshon, Samson, was not from Shevet Yehuda on his father's side, but only on his mother's side. We have a tradition that... What? Yeah, who else? Yes. So we have a tradition that Mashiach is going to be from Shevet Yehuda on one side and Shevet Dan on the other side, but not necessarily according to the Rambam. Moreover, again, it doesn't have to be Shevet Yehuda from the father's side, it can even be from the mother's side. Essentially, any Jew...
What is the source that she could be from the mother's side, the Mashiach would be?
In Rashi, in Parshas V'echi, he thought Shimshon was Mashiach. Before Mashiach and David. That's not the point, though. The point, yeah, but it doesn't matter because it means that you have to be from Shevet. You don't have to be from Shevet Yehuda. You have to be descended from Shevet Yehuda. The Nasim in Eretz Yisrael, it's well known. Well, from Gemara Sanhedrin, it's well known. It's Gemara Sanhedrin. The Nasim in Eretz Yisrael were also from the female descendants, from the female line from King David. From their male side, they were not from the house of King David, and nevertheless, they had this position, not just as a result of, but also contributing to their position was the fact that they had this descendancy. The point I'm trying to make, why am I bringing this all down? Because I'm saying what the Rambam really holds is that anybody can be Mashiach. In other words, anybody here, if you want it, can try and be Mashiach. All you have to do is three things. You have to defeat the enemies of the Jews, ingather the exiles, and rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. That's all you have to do.
That's all you have to do?
That's all you have to do. So the Rambam says, if you succeeded, then you're certainly Mashiach. If you didn't succeed, you're not a bad guy. You're one of the kings of the house of David, who was just a regular guy, a king, nothing, not a Mashiach. So therefore, in fact, according to the Rambam, there really is no need for the Mashiach to be a Yechida Klolis, as we described last night. It doesn't have to be a mystical figure. He actually is the first guy who will step up to the plate, will be able to accomplish all these things. And we're still waiting for somebody. Now, one second. That's the case, of course. Let's go back historically to Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi in the 1600s hoodwinked the overwhelming majority of Orthodox Jews, including the rabbis. Almost everybody thought he was Mashiach. And he, according to the Rambam's perspective, he could have been Mashiach. The only way we figured out he wasn't Mashiach is when he converted to Islam. Minor detail, right? So,
Rambam say that you can convert to Islam, though? Do you have a second much left that you can convert to Islam?
No, Rambam says you can't, but if you did it, you should be viewed with compassion.
But the Arishonim said you could.
Not the Rambam. So, when he converted to Islam, he certainly lost his position as Mashiach, but besides that, Shabtai Tzvi depicted himself as being a mystical Mashiach as well. And for example, he eliminated a lot of the prohibitions which we have, and he held that the bracha Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Matir Asurim should be pronounced at his behest Matir Isurim, because he came and he eliminated many of the prohibitions of the Torah. So in this way, he also already earlier was a suspect, not qualified, because the Rambam says it's got to be a kosher person. It doesn't have to be a great tzaddik, but it's got to be a kosher person, right?
You can't listen to him because of Navi Sheker.
Sorry?
If like Navi Sheker, he tells you to break mitzvahs, and do you think...
Well, only if he says it in Nevuah, but yes, then he will be a Navi Sheker. Now, so, if that's the case, as I said, anybody could be Mashiach. And this is clearly indicated also because the Rambam brings down the Gemara, in which Rabbi Akiva thought that Ben Koziva, better known as Bar Kochba, was Mashiach. Now Bar Kochba, he was a big warrior, but he wasn't the biggest Talmid Chacham in the generation. We don't even know if he was a Talmid Chacham at all.
How do we know that?
What?
How do we know that he wasn't Talmid?
Because Rabbi Akiva was alive. He wasn't the biggest Talmid Chacham in the generation.
No.
He didn't have smicha. No! But the point is, you missed this last night, the point is, from the Hasidic perspective, Mashiach has to be the greatest person in the generation.
No, yeah, I went to that, I remember.
Okay, so? Bar Kochba clearly wasn't. First of all, he didn't have smicha, right? It's called Bar Kochba, or Bar Koziba. And besides that, this is the generation of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the greatest Tana of them all. It's generally accepted.
At all?
Bar Kochba, no, he's never quoted any Mishnah.
So he wasn't
No Mishnah?
So he wouldn't sit.
He was a general.
He was a general.
So basically, he wouldn't sit on the dais if there was a big, let's say, the Sima Shas of that
Zagura convention tomorrow night.
Gouda convention. He wouldn't sit on the Gouda convention's
No.
dais.
Zagura convention.
He wouldn't sit at the Gouda convention's dais.
It depends if he was chanting the session or not. Right? So in any event, it's clear to us that Bar Kochba was not the Yechida Klolis for Rabbi Akiva. If anything, Rabbi Akiva was the Yechida Klolis for Bar Kochba. Now, if you're a Chassid, you could claim and say, well, that was because it wasn't yet time. But once the time came about, starting with the Baal Shem Tov, so then, from now on, it's got to be the greatest person alive. But there's no proof of that from the Gemara nor from the Rambam. Because neither the Gemara nor the Rambam say it's got to be the greatest person, and, in fact, Bar Kochba was a candidate to be Mashiach. Now, there are a couple of other things which we have to realize around this, which the Rambam says elsewhere. The Rambam first of all says that he believes, this is his svara, he has no evidence for this, at least not that he gives us, but that prophecy will be restored to the Jewish people before the coming of Mashiach. He doesn't pass that halacha. He says it as an assumption, but it's not definitive halacha. Moreover, if I recall correctly, I might be mistaken about this, if I recall correctly, he says elsewhere that Mashiach will be the smartest man, smarter than Shlomo Melech, but below Moshe Rabbeinu in Nevuah. But he doesn't say, the thing is that he doesn't say that in the critical place, in Hilchos Malachim, where he describes the criteria to be Mashiach. Again, this is an anticipation which he has, an expectation. But it doesn't mean that it has to be that way. And clearly, again, with Bar Kochba, we see that it's not necessarily the case.
But Rabbi, I thought that if someone claims to be a prophet, there's a lot of attention to put into it. So how would we know if someone actually is a prophet in today's age?
Well, in Lubavitch, they believe that the Rebbe was a Navi and that he demonstrated his Nevuah.
Really?
Okay. Yes.
Really?
Everybody else.
Yes. And not only that, I will tell you, once we're on the topic, that they believe that the Rebbe fulfilled all three criteria to be Mashiach.
What did
No.
What?
Well,
You have to understand something we said a couple of nights ago, that in Kabbalah there's this concept of a bechina, of an aspect. So an aspect can be a miniature fulfillment. Not the full fulfillment, but a miniature symbolic fulfillment. So they say Lubavitcher Rebbe, he saved, he fought the wars of the Jews successfully in two things. First of all, he brought about the fall of the Soviet Union. Secondly, I don't know how, but somehow. Secondly, he predicted, and this is his prophecy, and the assumption is through that prophecy safeguarded the Jews of Israel from scuds which were shot at them during the first Gulf War. So that's how he was victorious in the wars of Israel. The next thing, and a prophet. By the way, by this standard, I'm a prophet too, because I remember I predicted very distinctly that the scuds would not have a significant impact on the land of Israel. But one is forbidden to claim one is a prophet if one is not, so I'm not claiming.
Did you do the in-gathering?
Didn't do the in-gathering, no, I didn't. So, but I didn't say Mashiach, just a Navi. The next...
Why did Rebbe put it on the stairs? Why did Rebbe have that hunch that it wouldn't affect Israel?
This is Kodesh Baruch Hu safeguards Klal Yisrael.
Rabbi, there was more than just that the concept with the scuds. That was just one example. This stuff also during the 6-day war that specific people come up to. There's also various other stories that people have personally dealt with.
Okay.
They've also had stuff.
But the most recent thing which is cited is the scuds. The next thing, the ingathering of the exiles, he fulfilled by making many Baalei Tshuva, by sending the shluchim all over the world and getting people to come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's, again, a symbolic ingathering of the exiles. And the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, again, in a symbolic way, was accomplished by the building of 770 in Crown Heights. Now,
there's more to it.
It's they call it Beis Rabbeinu. I'll say it.
I know, I'm just trying to avoid the little comments from the black people in the back. Seriously.
Because you can't admit the truth.
I want to shoot you in between the eyes, right there. Seriously.
No, don't pay attention about them. They are God. They are the judges. They already know who is the Mashiach, who is
That's the love or Sameach. Okay, so
they came here to learn, but they already became judges. You know.
So they quote a Gemara which talks about Beis Rabbeinu Shebebavel. Rav's house was like a house in Bavel, which was a focal point of the Judaism in Bavel, and therefore, they apply that to the Rebbe's headquarters in 770. Also, you should know Lubavitch theology. This is also a reason why 770 is so important. Is that the reason why the Rebbe never moved to Eretz Yisrael? He never went to Israel, never even visited. No, nobody knows for sure, but one of the reasons advanced in Lubavitch theology is because throughout the history, the world, the activities of Jews have focused on the upper hemisphere. The upper hemisphere is the hemisphere which includes Eretz Yisrael and is commonly associated with what we call the Old World, Europe, Asia, Africa. Very little work was done till relatively recently in the lower hemisphere, which is the one which includes North America and South America, and perhaps Australia, I don't know what else. And the exile of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe from the old world to the new world clearly indicated that the time for fixing the new world was upon us. And the Rebbe held that until the sign comes that the fixing has been complete, he has to remain and coordinate the fixing of the lower hemisphere. Now, just as the upper hemisphere has a focal location, which is Yerushalayim, and the focal point in Yerushalayim was the Beis HaMikdash, you know the obvious comparison. The focal point of the lower hemisphere is Crown Heights. And the focal point of Crown Heights is 770. So there's this correspondence between the 770 and the Beis HaMikdash, and that's how the Rebbe is supposed to have fulfilled the chinos, aspects of all three criteria of the Mashiach, of being Mashiach. So that was the way Lubavitch says it. He was b'chezkas Mashiach. He was assumed to be Mashiach, even though he hadn't yet completed all the tasks in their literal sense, but he was on the way.
Is there any sources anywhere in Jewish text that say that a person can be assumed have the assumption of being Mashiach if they fulfill symbolic criteria?
Well, they take apart the Rambam very analytically, and the Rambam does mention that a person who does all these things, who succeeds in partially in these things, is in fact Chezkas Mashiach, and then it comes later on becomes Mashiach Bevadai if he completed all the tasks.
He always says if he dies, then he's a Mashiach.
Yeah.
I thought he was killed by someone.
The flaw in the Rambam, the flaw in using the Rambam for Lubavitch, which is the flaw in the Rambam is that the Rambam says if he dies or is killed in battle, either or, then he's not Mashiach. So therefore, I think it's either or. I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure. I think it's this thing. I wasn't.
So therefore, after the Rebbe after Rebbe's Ptira, so then they had a big problem using the Rambam, because then the Rambam either had to say that the Rebbe didn't pass away, which is the Mashiachist position, or they had to say that, okay, that was the Rambam, we have other sources now. And we can go on to the other, Barbanel, we have other sources which they can rely on. Now, it's fun, I want to go back to that notion, which we spoke about last night. It's fundamental to realize, not in a negative way, but in a objective way, that this issue, in terms, if you're a Lubavitcher, is a classic example of the famous mashal of the Dubna Magid, of the archer who was walking down the street and saw arrow after arrow shot dead through a bullseye of each and every target, who ran after the archer, asked the archer his secret, and the archer said, my secret is very simple. First I shoot the arrow, and then I draw the bullseye around it. What? Right. So in other words, you start from the assumption that the Rebbe, being Yechida Klolis of the door, is therefore the only logical candidate to be Mashiach, and there is no other Yechida Klolis, and therefore remains the only logical candidate to be Mashiach, and then everything else you make go around that. So when the Rambam works, you use the Rambam. If the Rambam doesn't work, then you use the Barbanel, or whatever else you can find. So, again, from a Hasidic perspective, that's not outlandish. From a non-Hasidic perspective, it seems very strange to us, but from a Hasidic perspective, it's not outlandish. Yes?
So, if the Rebbe didn't literally complete all the things that he needed to complete, and he passed away, then how can he even be considered?
He's coming back.
But how? I don't understand. If he's physically dead,
he's dead. So what? We believe in Chesed Mason.
So they're saying that the Mashiach doesn't necessarily have to complete his work in one lifetime. He can come resurrect and.
Yeah, what's wrong with that?
The problem with that is that they say something about Christianity.
What? So you should know. You should know. Early Christianity. Let's go. I wanted to go back to early Christianity. In fact, if you strip Christianity of all the things that Paul did to it, Christianity is not such a bad concept. It was Jesus himself never claimed that he was God. He's called himself the Son of Man, not the Son of God. Although Son of God is a perfectly legitimate term in Judaism as well. We're all children of God. He never claimed that he came to change the religion. On the contrary, he said he didn't come to change one jot or tittle of the religion. And he perceived himself as being the Messiah which would redeem the Jews from the Romans and bring about the ultimate redemption. So, from that perspective, he wasn't such a bad guy. What happened later on is, and the question is how much we fault him for this, is his followers, most specifically and most blatantly Paul, who never even met Jesus in person but had a vision of him on his way to Damascus, is the one who eliminated halacha, who eliminated the notion of the return to Zion as the ultimate redemption, who equated Gentiles with Jews, and who also, of course, declared the divinity of Jesus. So, in fact, in early Christianity, before all that other stuff happened, although we don't hold that Yeshu, Jesus, whatever candidate to be Mashiach, okay, you wanted to believe that, we would say you're a kooky kind of guy, but you're still a Jew, a kosher Jew. In fact, it's interesting, there's some guy who has a website. He lives, I think, in the Tanya somewhere, and he is a convert to Judaism, and he converted with an Orthodox conversion. And he still advocates the acceptance of Jesus as a Messiah. And he says, I'm not kidding. I don't mean that I'm not a Messianic Jew like Messianic Jews who believe that he's really a divinity and that, they just pretend that he's only a Messiah. No, I really believe he's only a Messiah. And it seems that he's accepted in one of the communities, I think it's Ranana actually, where he lives as a legitimate Jew, and his conversion as a legitimate Orthodox conversion. And yes, the point may well be made that even if the Lubavitchers do believe that the Rebbe is Mashiach, and are mistaken about it, just like the early Christians were also, and Lahavdil, of course, because we know where Christianity went, and we don't hope and assume that nothing similar will ever chas v'shalom befall any Lubavitcher chas v'shalom. But the idea would be they would be Jews who have a belief which is erroneous, but is not heretical. That would be our perspective on it. Those of us who are not Lubavitchers. Yeah.
The question I have is on Lubavitch. Why is it that when you speak about like other sects of Judaism,
is this a general Lubavitch question or a Mashiach Lubavitch question?
Mashiach Lubavitch.
Okay.
I mean, it's whatever you want it to be.
Well,
I'll try not.
I might not answer it if it's too general.
I'll try not to get off. But when you speak about people from other sects of Judaism who are, I'm calling them Orthodox, they respect other Rabbanim, even though, like, a Svardi respect Rav Shach. We respect, a Litvak will respect Avada Yosef.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
I respect him as a Gadol B'Yisrael.
Well, that's because you're an Or Sameach. Or maybe you're an Or Sameach because of that.
I think people respect. My point is,
the Litvaks don't respect Rav Ovadia. They have the standard line they use, which is, yeah, he knows a lot, but does he know how to learn?
Right, but my point is that
you guys are not familiar with that prejudice we discussed?
Yeah, I know all about everything.
My point is people respect other Gedolim. People respect other Gedolim.
It's not as much as you think they do.
Okay, but give it as an
illusion.
Yeah.
People respect other Gedolim.
In Lubavitch, they respect the Reb Moshe.
Yes.
Still, I see it as
What?
everything.
It's fine, too.
Well, I'm talking more recently.
Still, I see it as everything.
Yeah.
I don't know.
By the way, the Satmars are not so respectful either of other Gedolim.
No,
The Satmar Rebbe was a nasty kind of guy when it came to other Gedolim.
Really?
I spoke to a
Yeah, he was very nasty.
I spoke to a Satmar, and he was very respected to other Gedolim than Satmar here. I mean,
Yes,
I see
because
Satmar
speaking to
here.
one person individually is better than speaking to
Yeah, but the Satmar, right? But I think they toned down a bit. But Reb Yoel was Eish Lahava was very, very fiery
I
about
have
people.
tremendous respect to Rav Hutner. I mean, he should.
No, not Rav Hutner. Rav Aaron Kotler, he had tremendous respect for. Rav Hutner was younger than he was, much younger, I think. Anyway, be that as it may, I think.
See what I'm getting at?
Yes, but this is a problem which Hasidus has in general, which may be more dramatic in Chabad, but is really systemic and endemic to Hasidus, which is that if you're not the Rebbe, basically you're nobody. And that's why internally in every Hasidus there's a big problem. The Rabbanim and Rosh Yeshiva, who might even be more learned than the Rebbes, don't get anywhere near that respect, because they're not the Rebbe.
Well, when I daven and when I go to Vishnitz, they respect. A lot of times I saw.
Nowhere near.
Okay, but they still have to respect. My friends in business still have to respect.
Okay, but I'm saying I don't think that Lubavitch is that different than other Hasidus in this respect. Again, this goes back to the theory I mentioned last night, that since they dress like Litvaks, you expect them to behave like Litvaks. But they don't, they're Hasidim. It's very important to remember, they are Hasidim. Okay? The fact that they daven late, also, they're Hasidim. In Skver, there's 1 minyan on Shabbos, starts at 11 a.m., right? So, Lubavitch starts before that. You got to give them credit for getting up early in the morning. They start at 10. Okay? So, now, there's another aspect which we have to discuss, which is related to Mashiach, which is that the Rebbe was more or less mechadesh the mass movement of demanding Mashiach. In other words, that we should demand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that Mashiach, that He should give us or bring us Mashiach. And we want Mashiach now.
That was actually made by J.J. Hach.
It doesn't matter.
I know, but
okay, he encouraged it. It's not relevant who came up with the slogan. Maisa became a part of the theme of Chabad. Yet we know that Chazal seem to tell us that's a very bad thing to do. You're not supposed to demand Bias Mashiach. And you're supposed to not even focus on when Mashiach is coming by making reckonings and calculations when you expect them to come. Not only that, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, 3 things come when you're not thinking about them. They come behesach hadas, when you're distracted from them. They are a scorpion. When you expect to see a scorpion, you won't see one. When you don't expect it, then you will find a scorpion in your shoe.
Highway.
Then,
That's good.
right? Then they didn't have that back then. There would be 4 things. Then they highway policeman. That's one of the things also which comes when you don't expect them. Then the other thing was something which you lost. Right? If you lost an object, you usually don't find it when you're looking for it, but when you stop looking for it. And finally, the last thing is Mashiach. That Mashiach doesn't come when Am Yisrael focuses on bringing Mashiach, but rather when Am Yisrael does not focus on bringing Mashiach.
I was going to say, weren't there various, reasons behind different persecutions of the Jews, and one of them was because we got too comfortable in the place, and that we should really go back to Jerusalem, go back to Israel. Because I'm pretty sure, a lot of these rabbis told us that that's the whole reason why they don't like Thanksgiving, because they feel like we're getting too comfortable here, and that we shouldn't be too comfortable. We should be wanting to go back to Israel, going back to
it's not the same thing as demanding Mashiach. Demanding Mashiach.
Isn't that demanding Mashiach?
No.
Isn't that
No.
How is that not?
That's called because that fulfills. There's a difference between what the Gemara says, Pisal Yeshua. You yearn for the redemption, which is a yearning, a tremendous desire, and demanding Mashiach. You can see Pisa means you anticipate and look forward to it, and you want it to happen. That's not the same thing as demand.